Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of Beyond the Case. This is a podcast which I believe has been enabled by my guest today. I spoke to her at one point during my OPM program about the challenge of public speaking that I would face. And so I want to introduce her. She is someone who has made a direct impact on how I think, how I lead. She helps me show up, not just in business, but also in life. And Linda is an executive coach at the OPM program with Harvard Business School. She's someone I've had the privilege of learning from firsthand. From what I understand, Linda, you help leaders move forward through reflective dialogues, some of which you and I have been part of together.
Absolutely.
You build practical frameworks for them, and you focus on intentional action, especially when the stakes are high, because you're dealing with business leaders who run companies of a certain scale. So, Linda, I'm very excited to have you here on this show today, and thank you for making yourself available.
So thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest on your podcast. We're in some ways living parallel lives from a podcast standpoint, because as you know, I just had the opportunity to co-create and co-host a podcast myself with a colleague of mine, Lisa Strutt. So it happens to be called the Forever Change Podcast, if anyone's interested. And we'll talk about that further personally and privately after. Thanks so much for having me. And you're right. I've been serving as an executive coach for, a little over 30 years, to be honest, in a wide range of organizations and industries. I typically find myself working with leaders who are moving into the biggest role they've had yet, right? In some cases, some of them, like you, are entrepreneurs and launching their own, new organizations or innovations. Some are within organizations and, moving up the ranks either within their own organization or moving to new organizations, often kind of making that leap from senior leader to the C-suite. Some are taking on their, first C-suite roles. Some are not quite there yet, but are building toward that. So there's a lot of joy that comes for me in working with leaders at those stages. I'm founder and principal of my own practice called Radiant Coaching and Consulting. As I mentioned, have some fun experimenting and exploring the podcast world this year and in the couple of years to come or the years ahead. And as you well know, and the reason that we came together is that one aspect of my practice is that I get to serve as executive coach and facilitator in a wide range of programs offered by executive education programs offered by Harvard Business School. And I am kind of new to the OPM class. So you were among my first cohorts to get to work with. Such a joy, such a joy. So thank you again for this connection and for the kind of words that you offered up front. I'm glad that our conversation, it means a lot to me that our conversations have been impactful in helping you achieve forward motion. Incremental or vast, it doesn't really matter as long as forward motion is in play.
Absolutely. And just to share some insights into how powerful each session with Linda has been. The first time we had a session together, my living group and Linda, the intent was to help us open up with each other, trust each other, bond together. And by the end of that session, I know I was in tears, maybe a few others as well. And I think, that moment stayed with us for the rest of the 3 weeks of Unit 1 at OPM. Sure. And I think we bonded like we've never bonded with most folks out there. And so, Linda, I think what you're doing is very powerful. And before we get into the kind of work you do, I want to understand why or at what point did you feel like you want to be a coach, a business coach?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. It kind of was sparked very early on in my own career as a leader and manager. Really loved that aspect of assembling teams and building collaborations and all of those kinds of things. And the more that I kind of took on as a functional leader or as administrative leader, the less kind of one-on-one time I was available to me, right? With whether it was my team or others across organizations. So at some point in time, I thought, you know what, I'm going to build toward gaining the experience, gaining the knowledge, right? Maybe gaining the confidence at different points in time to really work with people one-on-one full time, because that happens to be where my biggest joy kind of comes from. So why not spend my time in my biggest joy moment, right?
Okay. And then how did you get associated with your own practice and eventually with HBS?
Yeah, great questions. I worked, as I mentioned earlier, I worked across a number of industries, whether that's records and information management, aviation, banking and investments, financial management, those kinds of things of, kind of my organizational life before going on my own. spanned a number of different organizations and a number of different leadership roles in those organizations. Kind of my last in-house role, if you will, or internal role was within the Harvard University community. So I worked across the 11, professional schools that reside under the Harvard umbrella, and I had started to really focus energies on coaching internally in the Harvard community, whether that was in management of IT and HR and financial management and those kinds of things, or whether it was in the more academic settings, working with deans, working with faculty members, working with scientists, working with physician leaders, had really started kind of transitioning, into primarily coaching and facilitation in my role there. And along the way, I began to collaborate and work with the woman who at that point in time in the early 2000s was actually forming the coaching component within executive education at the Harvard Business School. And so, we met over coffee a couple of times, and it really became clear that my background and energy probably was a great match for a number of the programs offered that were starting at that time to offer coaching within some of the programs. And now coaching is just blossomed and offered across almost the full range of programs that are offered by exec ed. So that was I coached my first cohort in 2009. So yeah. So I've been doing it for a while now.
17
Yeah.
years. Great. Wow.
I know. It's crazy. It feels like yesterday.
Linda, business owners have teams, they have board members, they have family members. And so they're surrounded by so many individuals. They could reach out to anyone they want to get advice. But what is it that an executive coach would give them that their peers or the set of individuals they share workspace with or a house with, a family with, could not provide?
Sure. Well, I think all of those people who populate a leader's stakeholder map play a significant role, certainly in their lives and in their leadership. I think specifically an executive coach offers something that none of those do, right? We have the opportunity to kind of offer perspective. We don't live in the business. We don't live in the family. We don't have this unique opportunity to meet the leader where they are, right? So I think that's one piece. We're kind of a neutral observer of how things are progressing for the leader. I think beyond that, at the close of coaching engagements in my own practice, I often ask that, like, okay, so what was the most meaningful thing that we did over the last, several months or the course of our engagement? And almost without exception, it's providing a space for the leader to think out loud, right? Without judgment, right? Sometimes they just need to, I think, as a leader grows in their role, often the number of people that they can actually kind of talk to and be themselves with fully without judgment gets pretty small. And so I think at times, right, it ebbs and flows, but at times, and I think the coaching relationship just gives the opportunity for the leader. Sometimes they just need to hear themselves say what they're thinking out loud and then hear a perspective on it. Either sometimes there's a lively debate that happens, like, I don't know if that's working for you so well. Maybe, maybe there's another way to look at this, or whatever, or to kind of help further their thinking, or to just give them a moment to, an hour every couple of weeks to just reflect and really start to connect the dots in different ways, in ways that they haven't before. So it's kind of a walk alongside thing that I think is the benefit of an executive coach.
Great. And then after coaching so many successful founders, you mentioned you started this in 2009. So 17 years, must be thousands of founders and CEOs that you've worked with. Could you list a few personality traits that you see most often, which could harm a leader's ability to bring out their peak performance or could be harming their companies in some way?
Well, I think probably some of the things that you and your colleagues and maybe some of your guests already are finding is that more often than not, it's the things that we do really well as leaders that when it's too much of a good thing, get in our way. So I think, a couple of things that I've observed, certainly in my own practice and with some of the cohorts like yours that I've had the opportunity to work with, is one thing that can really be such a leverage point is a leader's approach, especially entrepreneurs, CEOs' approach to the work through the lenses of pace and passion, right? Pace and passion are the things in many ways that serve us well as leaders in those roles, especially early on and building an organization and things like that, it's exactly those things that can get in our way, right? Sometimes our need for speed is not exactly what the situation or the team or the organization needs at that point in time, right? We need the drive, but maybe we need to calibrate that pace a little bit. Same thing with passion, right? Of course, passion is at the core of any leader, and certainly specifically entrepreneurs and senior leaders. It's at the core of what they bring to the table. And sometimes that can be too much of a good thing, right? It can go from enlisting followership to being a little more directive or a little bit more in the weeds or a lot more in some cases than the situation could really benefit from. So those are kind of two pieces. We'll get to some of the other pieces here in just a few minutes, I'm sure.
I'm so tempted to turn this into a session that you and I would have, because one of the
Exactly.
biggest conversations that my father and I disagree on is he feels I try to move too fast. And he tells me, if you look at the trend, you have to go back in time and then
Yeah.
try and cross the T's and dot the I's. Why not take a little slow? And,
Right.
and I think it resonates a lot with what you've mentioned.
You're like, yeah, but if we wait, we'll miss the opportunity, right? So, yeah.
And so, could you also speak about a blind spot that you consistently see in some of these successful business owners?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's related to that pace and passion piece, but in the data that I have from my work with my own clients, over the years, I've conducted many, dozens, hundreds maybe, 360 interview based assessments for leaders at all different phases of their development. And there are really three components or three aspects of what they bring to the table that can often both be leverage points and get in the way. So those three things are clarity, communication, and rigor. And a deficit or the absence of one or more of those things is what can often start to derail a leader's effectiveness. So for instance, clarity is so important, but if I'm so far out there pace wise with the clarity that I have about where we're going, but I haven't communicated or conveyed it in a way that enables people in my organization to jump in, to dive in, to follow and to create as well, then I'm missing something. And to your point with what your dad said to you, kind of have to go backwards, and nobody wants to go backwards. The point is forward motion, right? And sometimes the pace of forward motion is what can get in the way of that clarity. Communication, the same thing. Often I'll, work with leaders who are like, but they should know that. It's like, okay, but did you say it? Did you articulate it? Well, no, they should just know. And I'm like, okay, well, how will they possibly know if you don't actually communicate what it is that you're aiming for, or what it is that your expectation is, higher or lower, or, those kinds of pieces. And then rigor is all about execution, right? Sometimes we get ahead of ourselves in the ideation and ahead of ourselves in terms of what we're aiming for. But, as entrepreneurs, there's a point in time where we have to do it all. We have to do all the clarity, all the communication, all the rigor, right? Our hands are in everything. But there comes a point in time where now we have a business to run, and I can't possibly have my hands in everything. So I need to care about execution in many cases as a leader, but I don't necessarily have to be the one who does it. But I do need to communicate what positive execution is going to look like, right? So clarity, communication, rigor, that's kind of my theme song in many ways when I work with my clients, based on, what I've learned from them over the years.
Spoke about the 360-degree analysis. Is that the same as the baseline report that we all benefited from? Is the baseline?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that it is not the same. It is
No.
not the same. So in that case, the tool that we enlisted is called the Cantor
And sure. Yeah.
assessment, and you're the only one who completed that, right? Nobody else, kind of provided input into those results. You completed those assessments. So that was really a form of self-assessment in a way that gives us insight into strengths, opportunities, leverage points, blind spots, led to was informative to some of our conversations. But a 360 is really gaining insights around our impact and our way of going about working from a number of people all around us. Ideally, people who report to us, clients, collaborators, peers, those kinds of things. And then someone we may have worked for at some point in time. For the, entrepreneur and CEOs, maybe that's, the board, things like that. So that's really to get insight into, well, what have you noticed about this person that, you want to see more of? And that they could really leverage. And, what if you experience with this person that, one question I ask is, okay, if there's one thing that they never did again that you would be so happy that they never did again, what would that be, right? Because that'll get us to that set of things that might really be barriers to that pursuit of forward motion.
Okay. Going back to your experience with the powerful leaders, what happens psychologically in your experience to leaders once they become the most powerful person in the room?
Mm. So I'm not sure that I'm the person to be able to specifically answer the question around the psychological piece, right? That is not my domain. It is not my expertise. From a behavior standpoint, I can offer a couple of things, and it's not so different, I think, than, maybe what we experience in those first couple of hours or those first couple of days of our cohorts being on campus at the at the business school. But this is also true for leaders, in their own organizations or entering new organizations. There are points where I'm going to be questioning a bit, right? I'm going to be questioning, am I cut out for this? Am I going to be enough for this role? Am I going to be able to compete? Right, with those around me? Am I going to be able to lead those around me? So there's a little bit of just questioning that happens, right? I'm not even going to go so far as to call it insecurity, because it's not that. It's just kind of questioning and getting a lay of the land, so to speak. Like, what's, who else is around, and how do I leverage them, or, those kinds of pieces. And then over time, pretty quickly, then we start to identify, if I'm working with them, we start to identify, okay, so what are the things we know? What are the things we don't know? What are the things that got you to this place, that you leveraged to get to this place? And are those the same things that you can leverage moving forward? Probably not. It's a subset of those things that we can leverage moving forward. But what else do I have to learn? What else might I need to be open to, right? Moving forward. So I think one time, we talked about, is it self-awareness and confidence, right? Or is it one or the other that really differentiates a successful leader? And I think I would adjust that a little bit, because I think, to be honest, and if we're honest with ourselves as leaders, confidence ebbs and flows a little bit depending on the situation, right? Whether it's a success situation or a failure situation, my confidence can ebb and flow ever so slightly or deeply, depending on the situation. But what really differentiates leaders who are able to, across a complex stakeholder map, across a variety of situations and types of organizations that they might be building, is really that combination of both curiosity and self-awareness, right? Those leaders who feel like they're all set, I've learned what I need to learn, now everybody can just follow me, have created already some blind spots for themselves. But those leaders who come in and say, yeah, we've never been in this place before, right? What do we have to learn? Who knows, about this particular barrier? Like, who's faced this before? Great. How do we want to face this? Right. That's a great example. I don't know if that's going to work for us, but how do we want to face that? And then certainly the self-awareness of, what do I bring to the table that enables forward motion, and what do I bring to the table that might be a barrier to forward motion? So
Right.
curiosity and self-awareness, I think, are big.
Linda, when you put a number of successful business owners together in programs like the OPM, which I
Mm.
was part of, what are some of the insecurities or doubts that you start recognizing which are surfacing amongst the leaders? Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think in those specific situations, where uh, they're I'm going to be spending the next, in your case, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks with,
3 weeks.
a cohort here. I think there's a little bit of wonder when individuals get to campus. I wonder what it's going to be like. It's not uncommon for participants to come to Harvard Business School for these exec ed programs who don't actually have a formal college experience, life at a university experience. And so in some cases, it's new. It's new for everybody to be on that, particular campus, but it can be even more new for those who haven't had an on-campus experience yet in their careers. So I think there's kind of a couple questions that I've noticed float around. First, like, well, who else is here? Right. And what do they do? And what do they bring to the table? And, what companies are they from? Or, what have they founded? Those kinds of things. So there's a little bit of, I don't know, kind of maybe positioning, and how do I fit into that? Right. And then there's a little worry around, well, what's the classroom going to be like? Am I going to be able to perform, so to speak, in the classroom, participate in the classroom to the degree I want to, am I worried about that, et cetera? But to your point, one of the magic, elements of of the approach that I have witnessed. I've witnessed a lot of different programs over the years across a number of different organizations, but there's a magic that happens very early in um, the appearance, or the getting to campus, right? And that is you're matched with a living group. So, you have a cohort of, eight-ish people who will be your study partners, et cetera. And in order for that to work, and they'll be your consultants, right? While you're there, in order for that to work, you have to get to know each other quickly and deeply. And you alluded to that, kind of described that experience that you and your cohort had in your first experience on campus.
From your conversations, what do you recognize as how lonely is it to actually run a company?
Oh, yeah. It can be, right? It can be because, for some of the things that we talked about earlier, why is executive coaching, or what does executive coaching bring to a leader? It brings them that space to think, to create, to reflect, to articulate, to debate, all the things that they need to do to feed their energy toward building an organization and achieving forward motion. But I think, so I think it's related. I think it can feel very lonely because, there aren't a lot of people sometimes who are doing what you do, right? And so finding connections, finding people you trust in different industries, in similar roles is absolutely critical, I think, for leaders in your situation and those that you're interviewing now and as part of your podcast and coming across is, build that sense of connection and put ourselves in situations that enable us to build that sense of connection. It's not necessarily our first thought. Our first thought is build my company, move fast, right? Be the innovator, be the entrepreneur, those kinds of things. But that sense of connection, taking the time to create that sense of connection will assuage that feeling of loneliness that will ebb and flow over time.
Last question before I let you go. Could you speak about the kind of moments that truly reveal a leader's character?
Yeah. I think that being faced with the unexpected, right, can really bring it, because sometimes it's a complete failure. Sometimes it's, compelling success, whatever that is. But dealing with the unexpected, right? If I am a leader who, when presented with the unexpected, defaults to volatility, defaults to insecurity, defaults to kind of a blaming stance or things like that, looking for fault, things like that, then that says a lot about me as a leader. And so, kind of working through that from a coaching standpoint will welcome the unexpected and really leverage that natural sense of curiosity and that natural sense of self-awareness to say, okay, I know what maybe my go-to is in this situation, but how do I actually want to show up as a leader across these stakeholder groups?
Fantastic. Linda, thank you very, very much. I know you have a
Thank you.
schedule and you took the time out to speak with me. So I appreciate this a lot. I hope this conversation encourages a lot more business owners to consider coaching as well. And I look forward
Absolutely.
to seeing you again soon.
Thank you such a pleasure to be with you today. And it's an honor to be asked. Thanks. And I will
Thank
talk to
you,
you
Linda.
soon.
Yeah,
Okay.
talk to you soon. Bye.